I was standing in my kitchen in Denver, holding a paint swatch card up against my wall, trying to decide between sage whisper and morning fog, when my phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol. I almost let it go to voicemail. Aunt Carol never called just to talk. She called when she needed something, or when she'd already decided something on my behalf and was informing me of it. "Hannah," she said, before I even finished saying hello, "we need to talk about the venue." My stomach dropped a little, the way it always did when Aunt Carol used the word "we" to mean you're going to do what I say. "What about it?" I asked, even though some small, tired part of me already knew. "Willow Creek Barn. You have it booked for October 18th. "Yes, my wedding in 4 months. "Well," she paused, and I could hear her exhale, like she was bracing herself to deliver something she considered generous. "Your sister needs it. Megan's engagement just happened, and David's family has that whole timeline thing with his grandmother's health, and Willow Creek is the only venue in the county with availability before the end of the year. You know how booked up everywhere is." I set the paint card down on the counter. "Megan got engaged 3 weeks ago." "I'm aware. I've had that venue booked for 14 months, Aunt Carol. I put down a $5,000 deposit. I have a florist, a caterer, a photographer, all coordinated around that date and that location." "I know, sweetheart, but think about it practically. You and Eric can push your date. You're not in any rush. You've been together, 5 years? What's a few more months? Megan and David want to get married before his grandmother. Well, you understand. The doctors aren't optimistic." I did understand that. I felt for David's grandmother, genuinely. But something about the phone call, the way Aunt Carol had clearly already worked out the whole justification before she dialed, made it feel less like a request and more like a verdict that had already been reached in a room I hadn't been invited into. "Have you talked to Megan about this?" I asked. "Does she know you're calling me?" "Of course she knows. We all discussed it at Sunday dinner. You were the only one not there." That stung more than I wanted to admit. I hadn't been at Sunday dinner because I'd been working a double shift at the hospital. I'm a labor and delivery nurse, and our unit had been short-staffed for weeks. While I was catching bobbies and consoling a mother going through a stillbirth, my entire family had apparently sat around my mother's dining table and decided the shape of my wedding without me. "I'll call Megan," I said. "Don't make this difficult, Hannah. It's one venue. There are other barns." "Not available in October, apparently," I said, "which is the whole problem." Aunt Carol's voice hardened, just slightly, the way it always did when she sensed pushback. "You've always been like this, even as a little girl. Everything has to be about what Hannah wants, what Hannah has to have. Your sister is trying to get married before a woman dies, and you're worried about a barn." That was Aunt Carol's signature move. She'd take something reasonable, my wanting to keep the venue I had booked and paid for, and reframe it as selfishness so absolute it bordered on cruelty. I'd watched her do this to my mother my whole life. Aunt Carol was my mother's older sister, and in our family, she had somehow become the unelected head of state. Every holiday, every family decision, every dispute over inheritance or seating charts at Thanksgiving, Aunt Carol had a verdict, and the verdict was final, because nobody had the energy to fight her on it. "I need to think about this," I told her, and hung up before she could respond. Part 2, the barn. Willow Creek Barn wasn't just a venue to me. It was the place where Eric had proposed, 18 months earlier, at the edge of the pond behind the reception hall, with string lights someone had left up from a previous wedding glowing faintly in the dusk. We'd chosen it because it was the place, not just a place. When we booked it for our wedding, the coordinator, a woman named Priya, had teared up a little and said, "Oh, I remember you too, the pond proposal. I'm so glad you're coming back." I called Eric first. He was at work, but he picked up. "She wants what?" His voice went sharp in a way I rarely heard from him. Eric is even-keeled almost to a fault. I'd seen him stay calm through car accidents, through his father's heart attack, through a canceled flight that stranded us in Chicago for 11 hours. But this cracked something in him. "Aunt Carol says Megan, and David need it because of his grandmother's health." "That's Hannah, that's manipulative as hell. Using a sick woman to guilt you out of your own wedding. Megan could get married literally anywhere. City Hall, a restaurant, their backyard. It doesn't have to be Willow Creek. I know. Do you? Because you sound like you're already halfway to saying yes. He wasn't wrong, and that irritated me more than if he'd been wrong. There was a pattern in my family, one I'd spent years in therapy trying to name and unlearn. I was the one who folded. Megan was 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I could remember, my role had been to make things easy for her. When we were kids and she broke my favorite bike, I let her keep using it because she cried harder than I did about consequences. When we were teenagers and she wrecked my mom's car during a fight with a boyfriend, I was the one who calmed my mother down, who absorbed the tension so the house could go back to functioning. When she dropped out of her nursing program in her second year, the same program I'd finished and was proud of, I was the one who told her it was okay, that she'd find her path, even while some part of me quietly resented that I'd worked myself to exhaustion for a degree she'd walked away from without consequence. Somewhere along the way, Hannah is the strong one had become code for Hannah is the one who absorbs the cost. I'm not saying yes, I told Eric. I'm saying I need to figure out how to say no without it turning into a war. There's not going to be a way to say no without a war, Eric said, gently but honestly. Not with your family, you know that. Part 3, my mother. I didn't call Megan that night. I called my mother instead, because some old instinct in me still believed that if I explained things clearly enough, if I could just get through to the right person, this would resolve itself sensibly. My mother, Linda, picked up on the second ring. She sounded tired in that particular way she always sounded tired, a tiredness that had less to do with sleep and more to do with 30 years of trying to keep peace between her older sister and her 2 daughters. Mom, did you know Aunt Carol called me about the venue? A pause, too long a pause. I did know, yes. And you're okay with this, with her calling to tell me I need to give up my wedding venue to Megan. Hannah, honey, listen. My mother's voice took on the particular softness she used when she was about to ask me for something she already suspected was unreasonable. I know this feels unfair. I do. But David's grandmother, Eleanor, she's been like a second mother to that boy. The doctors gave her maybe 4-5 months. If Megan and David wait for their own venue search, plan a full wedding on a normal timeline, Eleanor might not make it to see her grandson get married. Can you imagine carrying that? Can you imagine if that was you? I can imagine it, Mom. It's genuinely sad. But that doesn't mean the solution is taking my venue. I booked it 14 months ago. I picked it because it means something to me and Eric specifically. This isn't some interchangeable barn. I know, sweetheart. I know how much you love that place. She exhaled, and I heard the particular shake in her breath that meant she was near tears, a tactic I recognized even as I felt myself soften toward it, hatting myself a little for softening. I'm asking you, me, your mother, not your aunt. I'm asking you to do this for your sister. You've always been the strong one, the one who can handle things. Megan doesn't have that in her. If this falls through for her, I don't know what she'll do. And I would remember this, Hannah. I would remember for the rest of my life that my daughter did this generous thing so her sister could have her wedding before her fiancé lost his grandmother. There it was. The reframe, softer than Aunt Carol's version but somehow more effective, because it came wrapped in my mother's very real vulnerability, her very real exhaustion, decades of trying to hold our family's peace together with her bare hands. I could picture her sitting at her kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner, twisting the hem of her cardigan the way she did when she was upset. I need to talk to Eric, I said, which was a lie because I'd already talked to Eric. What I meant was, I need to not answer you right now, because if I stay on this call another minute, I am going to say yes just to make your voice stop sounding like that. Of course, honey, take your time. I hope you'll think about your sister, about what kind of person you want to be. That last line sat with me for a long time after I hung up. What kind of person you want to be? As if refusing to hand over my wedding venue made me a bad person. As if the version of me my mother wanted to be proud of was the version who kept disappearing so everyone else could take up the space. Part 4, the pattern. I didn't sleep well that night. Eric held me while I stared at the ceiling, running through every argument I could make, every counterpoint Aunt Carol or my mother might have ready. Around 1 a.m., I got up and went to my laptop, and almost without meaning to, I started writing down every instance I could remember of being asked to give something up for Megan. The bike when I was 9. The car when I was 16 and Megan was 14, and took it without asking and hit a mailbox. I was blamed for not watching her closer, even though I was at a friend's house at the time. My acceptance to the state university's honors dorm, which I gave up my sophomore year because Megan was struggling to make friends, and my parents thought it would help if I kept an eye on her by living in the regular dorms with her instead. The $500 I lent Megan for a security deposit on her first apartment. Money I never saw again, and was told, when I brought it up once, that I was being petty to mention it given everything Megan had been through with her ex. My graduation dinner, which got moved up a week because it originally conflicted with a concert Megan desperately wanted to go to, and no one thought to ask if I minded having my own graduation dinner rescheduled around a panic. At the disco show. Looking at the list in black and white, something clicked into place that I think I'd always known on some level but had never let myself fully see. This wasn't really about a barn, or a grandmother's health, or even about Megan specifically. This was about a role I'd been assigned in my family before I was old enough to consent to it. The role of the one who gives things up. The one whose wants were negotiable because she was strong and understanding, and the mature one. Megan's wants were treated as fixed points around which the rest of us rearranged ourselves. Mine were treated as flexible by default. I closed the laptop around 2 a.m. and made a decision. Not the decision my mother or my aunt wanted. A different one. Part 5. The conversation with Megan. I called Megan the next morning, before work. She answered sounding surprised. We hadn't talked one-on-one in almost 2 months, which said something on its own. "Hey, did Mom tell you about the venue thing?" she said, bright and easy, like this was a fun logistics problem rather than something that had kept me up half the night. Aunt Carol told me, and Mom called last night to ask me to give it up. I mean, I know it's a big ask. Her tone shifted slightly, defensive already. But you get it, right? With Alina's health, and honestly David's whole family has been so stressed, and I just felt like, of everyone, you'd understand because you're a nurse, you see this stuff all the time. Megan, I do understand illness. I sit with dying patients' families for a living. That's not the issue. Then what is the issue? The issue is that nobody asked me. You all decided this at a dinner I wasn't at, and then Aunt Carol called to inform me, like I was a logistics problem to be managed, not a person with a wedding of my own in 4 months. And now Mom is calling me, crying, telling me what kind of person I should want to be. That's not a request, Megan. That's pressure. There was a silence on the line. When Megan spoke again, her voice had lost some of its brightness. I didn't think about it like that. I really want this for David, for his grandma. I wasn't trying to steamroll you. Maybe you weren't, but somebody was. And I think you need to ask yourself whether you're comfortable with how this has been handled. Because right now, it looks like you're willing to let it happen as long as you get the venue. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, that's fair, she said quietly. What are you going to do? I'm not giving up my venue, I said, but I want to help you find something else. I mean it. I'll spend this weekend calling every venue in the county with you if that's what it takes. There has to be something available, even if it's not the dream venue. Even if it's a restaurant back room or somebody's backyard with rented chairs. If this is really about Alina seeing you get married, the location shouldn't matter that much, right? Megan was quiet for a moment. You're right, she finally said. It shouldn't. I think I got caught up in everyone was being so nice about it, telling me it would all work out, and it felt easier to just let them handle it than to actually do the work of finding another place myself. That, right there, was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in the entire ordeal. Part 6. The Standoff. Word got back to Aunt Carol within about 6 hours. I suspect from my mother that I had refused. My phone started buzzing that evening with a text from her that read, "Very disappointed in you. I thought you were better than this. Your sister is devastated." I didn't respond right away. Instead, Eric and I sat down and mapped out exactly what we were and weren't willing to do. We agreed. We would not give up Willow Creek Barn. We would help Megan search for alternatives, genuinely and generously, with our time and our contacts. Priya, the coordinator at Willow Creek, actually had relationships with several other venue managers in the region, and when I called and explained the situation honestly, without villainizing Megan, she gave me 3 names of barns and event spaces that sometimes had late cancellations. We would not attend a family conversation where Aunt Carol was present and treat it as a negotiation, because in my experience, negotiating with Aunt Carol meant agreeing to increasingly smaller concessions until you'd given up the whole thing anyway. And we would tell my mother, directly and calmly, that guilt was not going to work as a strategy anymore, not because we didn't love her, but because we loved her enough to want an honest relationship instead of one built on who could extract the most from whom. My mother called 2 days later. I picked up, ready for another round of the crying, pleading voice. Instead, she sounded different, quieter, more uncertain. Carol says you won't budge. I won't, but I've been helping Megan look for other venues. We found 2 decent options already. One of them, a place called Foxglove Hollow, has an opening on November 8th, which still gives plenty of time before. I paused, feeling for the name. Before Aliner's prognosis becomes a concern, according to what you told me. November 8th. That's not so far from your October date. No, it's not. My mother was quiet. I owe you an apology, she said eventually. I put you in an impossible position and called it love. I told myself I was protecting the family by keeping the peace, but really I was asking you to be the one who always absorbs things because it's always worked before. That's not fair to you. It never was. I hadn't expected that. Some tight, guarded thing in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you for saying that. I still think Carol is going to be furious with both of us. Carol is always furious about something, I said, and my mother actually laughed, a small, surprised laugh, like she hadn't given herself permission to find anything funny about our family in a long time. Part 7, Aunt Carol's Last Stand. Aunt Carol did not go quietly. She called a family meeting, an actual meeting at her house, with printed-out venue comparisons, as though this were a corporate merger and not a family disagreement about barns. I went, mostly because I wanted to say my piece directly rather than through relayed messages, and because I refused to let her narrative of difficult, selfish Hannah stand unchallenged in a room I wasn't in. She started in almost immediately. I don't understand why this has become such an ordeal. All you had to do was be generous. Your sister is trying to give a dying woman one last happy memory, and you're worried about your color scheme. That's not what this is, I said, keeping my voice level, which took more effort than I let show. I offered real help finding Megan another venue. I found 2 solid options within her timeline. What I didn't do is let you and Mom decide without asking me that my wedding was less important than hers. Those are 2 different things, Aunt Carol, and I think you know that. I think you're punishing your sister for something that isn't her fault. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm setting a boundary, which is different. I looked at her directly. You've been making decisions for this family for as long as I can remember, and everyone goes along with it because arguing with you costs more than it's worth. I understand why. I did it for years too, but I'm not doing it with my own wedding. The room went very quiet. My mother sat with her hands folded in her lap, not intervening, which itself was a kind of statement. A break in a lifelong pattern of stepping between her sister and her daughters to smooth things over before they got uncomfortable. Aunt Carol's face went through several expressions, surprise, then something like calculation, like she was searching for the next lever to pull. Well, she finally said, stiffly, I hope you can live with yourself. I hope you can live with the way you've spoken to me for the last week, I said, but I think we'll both manage. I left the meeting shaking slightly, adrenaline burning through me the way it does after any confrontation you've spent your whole life avoiding. Eric was waiting in the car outside. How'd it go? He asked. I think I just had my first real fight with my aunt in 30 years, I said. And I think I won. Or at least I didn't lose, which might be the same thing this time. Part 8, The Wedding. Megan and David ended up booking Foxglove Hollow for November 8th. It wasn't the venue she'd originally dreamed of, but by the time the date arrived, she told me she didn't think she'd have chosen differently even if she could. It turned out to have a beautiful stone chapel on the property that Willow Creek didn't have, and a leaner, frail but present, sat in the front row in a wheelchair decorated with white ribbons and cried through the whole ceremony. She passed away 6 weeks later, peacefully, having gotten to see her grandson married. I went to that wedding. I cried too, honestly, grief and relief, and something like pride tangled together. Megan hugged me afterward and said, quietly, "Thank you for not just giving in. I don't think I would have actually looked for another place if you had. I would have just taken what was easiest and never thought about what it cost you." My own wedding happened at Willow Creek Barn on October 18th, under the same string lights where Eric had proposed. My mother gave a toast that surprised me. She talked, briefly, but honestly, about learning that loving your children sometimes means refusing to ask one of them to disappear so another one can be comfortable. Aunt Carol came, sat in the third row, and did not make a scene, which from her was practically an apology in itself. "We haven't fully repaired things. I don't know if we ever will." Not completely, but something shifted that week that hasn't shifted back. My mother calls me now, sometimes just to talk, not to ask me for anything. And when Megan had her first real crisis since the wedding, a job loss, 6 months later, she called me to vent, not to ask me to fix it for her. That, more than the venue, more than the toast, more than any apology, felt like the actual outcome I'd been fighting for the whole time. Not revenge, not even really winning. Just being seen, finally, as a person whose wants counted as much as everyone else's. The end.